The crowd gathered under the imposing shadow of the Arc de Triomphe, now even more colossal and surrounded by autonomous surveillance drones. Blue and gold flags fluttered over the Champs-Élysées, while a military march resounded through the loudspeakers built into the monument's great columns. Armored exoskeletons walked alongside the legions of the Garde Imperiale, showing off their cutting-edge technology based on the Empire's scientific advances. In the sky, a gigantic holographic projection of Napoleon Bonaparte watched his subjects with a cold, immortal gaze. That was the world in which Alexandre Moreau had grown up. There were no Western democracies. The French Empire had reigned absolute for more than 2 centuries, consolidating its supremacy not only through war, but through science. Floating cities rose in the oceans, military spacecraft patrolled near-Earth orbits, and society was tightly controlled by predictive algorithms that identified descent before it even occurred. Alexander was not a soldier, but a technological archaeologist, tasked with preserving the empire's official historical narrative. His job involved authenticating documents and recovering forgotten technology, ensuring that any invention that predated the regime was properly controlled and reinterpreted to serve the imperial dynasty. However, he had never felt truly part of that order. His fascination with history was not merely a duty, but an inner calling. It was this curiosity that led him to the discovery that would change everything. In an underground library protected by DNA scanners, Alexander found a locked holographic file. It was a corrupted fragment of an abandoned secret project. When he finally managed to decrypt it, he found information about a forbidden device created in the 19th century. The records pointed to a rudimentary technology, developed by an unknown scientist, capable of manipulating time and space. Time machine. Alexander's heart raced. The Empire taught that Napoleon had achieved supreme power through his military genius and scientific advances. But what if there was something more? What if his rise had been altered by an outside force? He didn't dare tell his superiors. He knew the fate that awaited those who unearthed forbidden secrets. But he needed help, and there were only 2 people he trusted: Elise Dumas, a rebel historian specializing in alternative chronology, and Lucien Garnier, a former member of the cybernetic resistance who had access to the Empire's secret databases. Meeting in one of the hidden basements of the Louvre Museum, Alexander activated a holographic projector, displaying the fragmented data he had recovered. "This could change everything," he whispered, pointing to a rudimentary digital schematic of a time displacement device. "If this technology really existed, then history has been manipulated," Elise added, her eyes widening. "But by whom? And for what purpose?" Lucien remained silent for a moment, observing the complex calculations floating in the middle of the projection. "If this is real, we're not the only ones who know," he said at last. "The Empire must be aware. And if they find out that you've accessed this data, Alexander, you'll be dead before dawn." A shiver ran down Alexander's spine. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but the truth had never seemed so vital. "We need to find this machine," he declared, his voice full of determination. "Find out how and why this technology was used. And if we can, maybe we can correct the course of history." Elise exchanged an uncertain glance with Lucien, but finally nodded. The fate of time and the Empire was about to change again. And so, unaware that they were being watched by artificial government intelligences, the 3 of them took the first step towards a future that shouldn't exist. The night was a black veil over Paris, broken only by the cold glow of the patrol drones that crisscrossed the sky. Underground, beneath the foundations of the Louvre Museum, Alexander, Elise and Lucien were following a holographic map projected from the fragmented data they had deciphered. The path led them to a forgotten wing, locked for over a century. The rusted metal of the door indicated that no one had been there since the early days of the Empire. "Are you sure this is it?" whispered Elise, looking at the walls covered in metal plates corroded by time. "The data points to this exact spot," replied Alexander, running his hands over the structure. He pressed a hidden panel, and a greenish glow illuminated the wall. In response, an ancient mechanism creaked inside the hinges, and the door slid into the floor. On the other side, an underground chamber revealed itself, dust dancing in the air in the bluish light of the illumination suits the three wore. The place was an abandoned laboratory, full of rusty equipment and deactivated holographic screens. In the center, something covered in a large black cloth awaited them. Lucien advanced cautiously and pulled at the fabric. Beneath it, a cylindrical metal structure gleamed in the dark. It was a large device, with exposed gears and an analog control panel, very different from the ultra-advanced technology of the Napoleonic 21st century. On its sides, unknown symbols glowed in greenish tones, and a holographic screen lit up for a moment, projecting coded characters. This isn't just an old artifact," murmured Elise, her eyes wide. "It's functional. Or at least, almost." Alexandre touched the panel, and suddenly the screen flashed and displayed a name the three of them had never heard before. Dr. Jules Lambert. Lucien accessed his neural implant and tried to find information about the name in the Empire's archives, but the response was alarming. There is no record of this scientist anywhere. It's as if he's been erased from history, he said. Alexandre felt a shiver run down his spine. If the Empire had erased this name, it was because Jules Lambert represented a threat to Napoleonic rule. But the most disturbing question still hung in the air. Could the machine really travel back in time? And if so, had anyone ever used it? Before they could ponder further, a metallic sound resounded behind them. Alexandre's heart raced. Infrared sensors were activated around the room. Someone knew they were there. "We've got company," shouted Lucien, as a siren echoed through the forgotten laboratory. Without thinking, Alexandre pressed one of the time machine's main buttons. At the same moment, the structure began to vibrate and the room was filled with an intense blue glow. The last thing Alexandre saw was the frightened look on Elise and Lucien's faces before everything disappeared in a vortex of distorted light. He was thrown through time. The impact was abrupt. Alexandre felt his body being thrown against the cold, damp ground. The bluish light disappeared, replaced by the orange glow of a cloudy dawn. Pain throbbed in his limbs as he tried to catch his breath. The air smelled different, a mixture of gunpowder and damp earth. He stood up slowly, blinking to adjust his vision to his surroundings. All around him, a vast field stretched out, marked by tents, flags, and soldiers preparing for battle. Cannons were dragged by horses, and men in Napoleonic uniforms sharpened their bayonets. Alexandre's heart raced. He hadn't just traveled back in time. He was in the middle of a military camp in the 19th century. What the hell happened? He muttered, groping in his pockets for any device that might help. His neural implant wasn't responding. With no connection to the Empire's database, he was alone. The sound of hurried footsteps brought him out of his thoughts. A young French soldier, no more than 20 years old, approached. "Monsieur, vous allez bien?" The soldier held out his hand to help him up. Alexandre hesitated but accepted the help. He needed to adapt quickly. The language and accent were familiar, but the way the soldier looked at him suggested that he didn't belong there. "Yes, I'm fine. Just a bit disoriented," he replied, choosing his words carefully. The soldier nodded and pointed to the center of the camp, where a large tent displayed Napoleon's imperial emblem. "You must report to the general. We can't have strangers wandering around here without explanation." Alexandre swallowed. If he was taken to Napoleon or any of his officers, he ran the risk of being identified as a spy. But running away wasn't an option either. The only way to survive at that time was to infiltrate and find a way back. As he walked through the camp, he observed every detail. The weapons, the outfits, the tension on the soldiers' faces. He knew exactly where he was. The Battle of Waterloo was about to take place. If Napoleon won, everything would change. Alexandre took a deep breath. Maybe, just maybe, he had come there for a reason. The main tent was imposing, adorned with the imperial emblem and surrounded by guards who observed everything with stern expressions. Alexander kept an upright posture as he was escorted inside. The air inside the tent was charged with tobacco smoke and the electricity typical of military meetings before a decisive battle. Sitting in the center, in an ornate chair, was Napoleon Bonaparte. He was shorter than Alexander had imagined, but his presence dominated the atmosphere. The emperor's eyes were penetrating, analyzing every detail of the newcomer with the precision of a born strategist. Next to him, Talleyrand, the astute diplomat, watched in silence, but his sharp gaze indicated that he was already suspicious of Alexander. "Who are you and why were you found wandering around the camp without a defined post?" Napoleon asked, his voice laden with authority. Alexander knew he couldn't reveal the truth. He thought quickly. "My name is Alexandre Moreau, sir. I was separated from my battalion during a patrol. I am a scholar of military strategy and have served as an advisor in previous campaigns, analyzing the enemy's movements." He lied, using his historical knowledge to his advantage. Napoleon leaned forward, puzzled. "A scholar? And what kind of forecast can you offer me right now, Moreau?" Alexander took a deep breath. If he wanted to win the emperor's trust, he had to impress him. Using his knowledge of royal history, he decided to take a chance. The British are going to retreat in vain to draw their troops into the center. But in reality, they are waiting for Blücher and his Prussian army to arrive and make a surprise attack on the right flank. "If that happens, the battle will be lost," he said, with certainty in his voice. The officers exchanged glances. Napoleon remained silent for a moment, drumming his fingers on the table. Then he gave a half-smile. "Interesting. That lines up with some reports from our spies. If your prediction is correct, we could turn this game in our favor. We'll see if you're a genius or just a smug fool, Moreau." Talleyrand, however, didn't seem convinced. "And how would a simple scholar have access to this knowledge?" he asked coldly. Alexander knew that answering directly could be dangerous. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on the diplomat and said, "War is a game of patterns, sir. Those who study the past can see the future clearly." Napoleon laughed low, satisfied. "Well answered. Moreau, from now on, you will be under my supervision. I want to see if your mind really is as sharp as you suggest." With that decision, Alexander had been admitted to the emperor's inner circle. But he knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Talleyrand would continue to watch his every move, waiting for any slip-up. Most importantly, he needed to find out how to reactivate the time machine to go back to the future. However, when he finally had access to the device, hidden in his makeshift tent, he realized a terrible problem. One of the essential components had been destroyed on the journey. If he wanted to return, he would have to find a replacement, or build a new one, and time was running out. The time machine was unusable. Alexander examined the destroyed controls and felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the extent of the damage. The power switches were burnt out, the internal circuits compromised. Without the right parts, he couldn't fix it. He walked away, controlling his panic. He was stuck in the 19th century. Meanwhile, Napoleon and Talleyrand continued their chess match. The emperor moved the pieces with meticulous precision, his eyes evaluating the minister's every move. Alexander watched in silence, trying to process his new reality. He couldn't fix the machine himself. He needed tools and components that didn't exist back then. The only solution would be to find a way to recreate them, or persuade someone to help him. Talleyrand, for his part, seemed to notice something strange in Alexander's posture. He looked quickly away from the scientist as he moved the pieces on the board. The diplomat was not an easy man to fool. He was already suspicious of the newcomer and, with recent events, his distrust was only growing. "You're restless, Monsieur Alexander," commented Talleyrand, moving a bishop. "Is something troubling you?" Alexander tried to choose his words carefully. "Just technical issues. But nothing I can't solve." Napoleon looked at him, frowning. "What do you mean, technical issues? Do you work with machines?" "Yes," replied Alexander hesitantly. "Kind of engineer." Talleyrand rested his hands on the table, interested. An engineer, you say? Where exactly did you come from? The question had an obvious trap. Alexander knew that any slip-up could make his situation worse. Before he could formulate an answer, an officer rushed into the room. Your Majesty, there is a messenger from Wellington. He brings a request to surrender. Silence overtook the room. Napoleon closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. Then he moved his queen on the board and captured the king of Talleyrand. Checkmate, he muttered before standing up. Alexander, come with me. Surprised, the scientist followed Napoleon through the halls of the palace. They passed through sumptuous halls until they reached a private office. The emperor closed the door and faced Alexander. You're not an English spy. Talleyrand thinks you are, but I know you're not. You have a different kind of knowledge, something I've never seen before. Tell me the truth. Who are you? Alexander's heart raced. He was at a crossroads. Telling Napoleon Bonaparte the truth could change everything. But lying to him could be even worse. Fate was now moving like a game of chess, and Alexander needed to choose his next move carefully. Napoleon's gaze was heavy on Alexander. The silence in his private office was almost suffocating. The emperor crossed his arms, waiting for an answer that never came. Alexander knew that any word spoken there could seal his fate, and perhaps even change history. Who are you? Napoleon repeated, impatience evident in his tone. Alexander took a deep breath. He couldn't tell the whole truth, but he couldn't lie blatantly either. I am a scholar of machines, Your Majesty, he said. My knowledge comes from distant lands, from a science that is little understood. Napoleon arched an eyebrow. A little understood science. Does that mean you can create weapons? Mechanisms for war? Alexander hesitated. He knew that Napoleon was looking for any advantage to turn the tide against Wellington. If he revealed too much, he could arm the emperor with knowledge beyond his time. But if he said too little, he could be dismissed as a phony. I can build useful devices, yes, he replied cautiously. But I need specific materials. Suitable tools. Napoleon narrowed his eyes, studying him. Then he turned and began to walk around the office. If what you say is true, then you can help me. His voice carried an unwavering determination. My empire will not fall to the British. If your knowledge can give me an advantage, I want to see you in action. Alexander felt a knot in his stomach. He was being drawn into the plans of the greatest military strategist of his time. Your Majesty, building anything would take time, he argued. And most importantly, it would need secrecy. If the English found out, I'll give you everything you need. But in return, I expect results. Napoleon interrupted. Tomorrow we'll start. I want to see if you're a charlatan or a visionary. Over the next few hours, Alexander was taken to a small makeshift laboratory inside the palace. A few rudimentary tools were at his disposal, but nothing compared to what he needed to fix his time machine. Talleyrand, always attentive, appeared shortly afterwards, leaning against the door while Alexander examined the instruments. The emperor trusts you, said the minister with a slight smile. But I don't. I still think there's more to your story. Alexander remained calm. I'm just a man of science, minister. Talleyrand let out a low laugh. We'll see. But know this. Napoleon can be merciless when betrayed. I hope you're prepared to play this game to the end. Alexander's heart was heavy. He was caught up in a dangerous plot between the greatest military strategist of the age and one of the most cunning diplomats in history. He had to find a way to fix his machine and escape, before it was too late. Alexander felt the weight of every second as he worked in the makeshift laboratory. The pressure from Napoleon was immense. The emperor, now victorious at Waterloo, was more ambitious than ever. With his empire consolidated, he was looking for ways to ensure that his dynasty would not only survive, but thrive for centuries to come. However, Alexander knew he couldn't allow that. The timeline he had helped to create was dangerous, and Napoleon's presence and power threatened the very freedom of the future. With each passing day, the technology of the 19th century became a trap, restricting his chances of rebuilding the mechanism of time travel. He needed allies. It was then, during one of his discreet outings around the palace, that he met Louis Daguerre. The young inventor was fascinated by machines and scientific revelations, and Alexander saw in him a possible key to his escape. With a few explanations about advanced principles of electricity and gears, he convinced Daguerre to help him create a rudimentary mechanism to restore the functionality of the time machine. But the dangers were growing. Elise and Lucien, still in the future, had managed to send an encrypted message through historical records, hidden in obscure notes. Alexander, analyzing documents from a military archive, found the message hidden in a code that only he could understand. The warning was clear. Napoleon was close to conquering the world. If Alexander didn't stop him, the empire would become unbeatable. It was then that he realized the only possible solution. He had to betray Napoleon. But the betrayal had to be precise, with no room for error. If he made a mistake, he could doom himself in the future. Alexander began to supply the emperor with false information, manipulating his expectations about new weapons and strategies. At the same time, he found a way to send crucial information to the British, a weak point in the French supply line. The decision came at a high cost. Talleyrand, always suspicious, realized that Alexander was hiding something. One silent night, the diplomat summoned Alexander for a private conversation. "I always knew there was something wrong with you," he said, pouring himself a glass of wine. "The emperor may be charmed by your promises, but I see through your facade. You don't belong in this world, do you?" Alexander's blood ran cold. He needed to act with caution. One false step and he could be arrested, or worse, executed. "I'm just a scholar, minister," he replied, measuring his words. "My knowledge may seem strange, but I swear my loyalty is to the empire." Talleyrand smiled, but his eyes held the calculating coldness of a man who had betrayed kings before. "I hope so, Monsieur Moreau, because Napoleon does not tolerate betrayal. And neither do I." From that moment on, Alexander knew that he was running out of time. He and Daguerre needed to finish rebuilding the time machine before it was too late. But his betrayal was already underway. The British now had the information they needed to defeat Napoleon. The storm was brewing, and Alexander was right in the center of it. The battle began again, but this time Napoleon was at a disadvantage. Alexandre Moreau, burdened by the weight of his choices, watched the chaos unfold around him. The information he had given the British had had an effect. The French had been taken by surprise, their lines crumbling under enemy pressure. Napoleon on his horse was shouting desperate orders, trying to reorganize his troops. His eyes burned with the flame of persistence, but the reality was cruel. Fate had been rewritten. Meanwhile, Alexander and Daguerre were ready. In the midst of the chaos, they found a safe place to activate the time machine. Daguerre, fascinated by the science of the future, manipulated the devices with the dexterity of an artist, while Alexander checked the calculations one last time. The battlefield was an inferno of smoke and blood. The sound of cannons and the clang of swords mixed with the cries of the wounded. But for Alexander, there was one detail that mattered above all. Napoleon was falling. His empire, which had defied time, was about to collapse forever. Little by little, the French soldiers retreated, realizing that defeat was inevitable. Napoleon, betrayed by fate and by those he had trusted, knew that his era ended there. He drew his sword, resisting until the last moment, but the battle was lost. Then, in the final instant, Alexander and Daguerre activated the machine. A flash enveloped them both, and within seconds they were pulled out of time. The world around them dissolved into pure energy. Alexander's last look before disappearing captured Napoleon's expression, a mixture of anger and resignation. The emperor knew he had been defeated, but his legacy could still live on. When the light gave way to reality, Alexander and Daguerre emerged back into the 21st century. But something seemed different. Small details around them indicated that history had subtly changed. And the most disturbing thing, a shadow loomed over them. Napoleon may have lost, but his dream of eternal empire might not be over. Looking at the horizon of his era, Alexander realized that his struggle was far from over. Elise and Lucien were waiting for him, but Alexander noticed an immediate problem. They had different memories. For them, certain battles in history took place differently, and events that Alexander remembered clearly didn't exist. He knew then that his intervention had changed something deeper in the timeline. Among Elise's fragmented accounts, one detail sent shivers down Alexander's spine. A mysterious Bonapartist secret club possessed documents about their existence and about time travel. This meant that Napoleon, even though defeated, had left a hidden legacy, ready to be awakened. While investigating, Alexander found an old manuscript, dating from the 19th century, with detailed instructions on how to recreate the time machine. Someone from the past knew he would return. Alexander knew at that moment that his fight was not over. Napoleon's empire might just be waiting for the right moment to resurface. Alexander felt the weight of the manuscript in his hands. Every word confirmed what he had feared. Napoleon had not given up completely. His legacy had been maintained for generations through the Bonapartist secret club, and now it was closer than ever to being realized. Together with Elise and Lucien, Alexander followed the clues that led him to an ancient safe, hidden deep underground in Paris. The code to open it was on the manuscript, a number that only he would recognize. Inside he found more documents, formulas and detailed schemes for rebuilding the time machine. But what terrified him most was the last item kept in the safe. A portrait of himself, hand-painted in the 19th century, and a single message signed by Napoleon. Monsieur Moreau, the Emperor sends his regards. Before he could react, a sound echoed through the underground. A shadow moved behind him. Alexander turned quickly and saw a man with an aristocratic bearing, wearing clothes from the Napoleonic era. In his hand was an old pocket watch, which he opened with a dry snap. "The story never ends, Monsieur Moreau," said the stranger with a slight smile. Alexander's heart raced. The Empire could be waiting for the right time to resurface. "The story never ends, Monsieur Moreau," said the stranger with a slight smile. Alexander's heart raced. The Empire could be waiting for the right time to resurface. Napoleon's last battle is over. Or has it just begun? Comment below on what you think. If you like this story and want to follow more content like this, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss anything new. The unknown still has a lot to teach us.